When you think of the Cretaceous period, your mind probably jumps straight to the obvious stars of the show. Massive theropods like T-Rex strutting around, long-necked sauropods munching on treetops, and maybe some feathered raptors causing chaos. In other words, dinosaurs running the whole operation. And sure, they were definitely the main characters, but here's the thing that nobody really talks about. They weren't always at the top of the food chain. In fact, there was a time when certain crocodiles looked at dinosaurs the same way you might look at a breakfast burrito: convenient, filling, and absolutely getting eaten. I'm talking about genuine, no-joke, dinosaur-munching crocodiles that could take down a theropod without breaking a sweat. And the craziest part? These crocs were so wildly different from the relatively chill, sit-and-wait ambush predators we know today that if you saw one, you'd probably think someone just stuck a crocodile head on something that had no business having one. But before we get into just how absurdly powerful these prehistoric nightmares were, let's start with the basics. Because even the basics are completely bonkers. So let's talk about the star of this particular prehistoric horror show, Sarcosuchus imperator, which roughly translates to flesh crocodile emperor. And honestly, that's not even dramatic, that's just accurate. This absolute unit lived about 112 million years ago during the early Cretaceous in what is now the Sahara Desert, though back then it was actually a lush river system full of fish, dinosaurs, and apparently one very large problem. When paleontologists first started piecing together Sarcosuchus from fossil remains in the 1960s and 70s, they quickly realized they were dealing with something special. And by special, I mean horrifyingly massive. We're talking about a crocodilian that measured somewhere between 9 to 9.5 meters, or 29 to 31 feet in total length. Now, to put that in perspective, that's longer than a full-size school bus, which typically measures about 25 feet. So imagine a school bus, but it has teeth and actually wants to kill you. Weight-wise, estimates put Sarcosuchus at around 3.5 to 4.5 metric tons, or roughly 8,000 to 10,000 pounds. For context, that's about the same weight as a modern adult elephant. Except instead of a trunk and a vegetarian diet, you've got a mouthful of over 100 teeth designed specifically for grabbing, crushing, and not letting go. And speaking of that mouth, the skull alone measured about 1.6 meters or 5.2 feet long, which is literally taller than most adult humans. So yeah, its head was bigger than you. Sleep tight. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, okay, big crocodile, I get it, hold on. Because modern crocodiles, even the biggest ones like saltwater crocs, only get up to about 20 feet and maybe 2,000 pounds. So Sarcosuchus wasn't just big. It was almost double the size of the largest crocs alive today, making it one of the biggest crocodilians to have ever existed. And here's where it gets interesting. Unlike modern crocs that are ambush hunters, lying in wait and exploding out of the water for a surprise attack, Sarcosuchus might have operated a little differently. Some researchers believe that due to its sheer bulk and size, it may have been too heavy to pull off those lightning-fast ambush strikes, and instead likely hunted more like a modern Nile crocodile, mixed with a little bit of, I'm too big for you to do anything about it. In other words, it could afford to be a bit more bold. But you know what's really wild? Everything I just told you about how massive and terrifying this creature was? That's actually the normal part. Now, you'd think that being the size of a school bus would be enough to make Sarcosuchus terrifying, but nature apparently looked at this croc and said, you know what? Let's add some extra nightmare fuel. Because while modern crocodiles stop growing once they reach maturity, Sarcosuchus didn't. At all. Researchers have found that this croc exhibited indeterminate growth, meaning it just kept getting bigger throughout its entire life until it died. And we know this thanks to something called osteoderms, those bony plates embedded in crocodile skin that basically act like growth rings in a tree. By analyzing these osteoderms, paleontologists figured out that the largest Sarcosuchus specimens were probably between 50 to 60 years old when they died. And here's the kicker, they were still growing. So the 31-foot monsters we found, those weren't even the final form. There could have been larger, older individuals out there that we just haven't discovered yet, possibly reaching lengths of 40 feet or more. Imagine being a dinosaur minding your own business and running into the crocodile equivalent of a 100-year-old tortoise that never stopped getting angrier and bigger. But it's not just the size that made Sarcosuchus different, it's what it was built to hunt. See, modern crocs have a pretty standard diet: fish, birds, mammals, the occasional unlucky wildebeest. They're opportunistic feeders, sure, but they're not exactly going after apex predators. Sarcosuchus, different story. Fossil evidence, including bite marks on dinosaur bones and even a partial juvenile dinosaur skeleton found in the same fossil bed with Sarcosuchus teeth marks, strongly suggests that this croc actively preyed on dinosaurs. And we're not talking about tiny little chicken-sized dinosaurs. No, we're talking about ornithopods and possibly even small to medium-sized theropods. One of its likely prey items was Tyrannosaurus, a 7-meter or 23-foot long herbivorous dinosaur that weighed around 2 tons. So, yeah, Sarcosuchus was out here hunting multi-ton dinosaurs like it was no big deal. And if you're wondering how exactly it pulled that off, the answer lies in its bite force. While we don't have exact measurements, estimates based on skull size and jaw structure suggest that Sarcosuchus had one of the most powerful bites of any animal ever, possibly exceeding 18,000 pounds of force. For context, a modern saltwater crocodile has a bite force of about 3,700 pounds, and that's already enough to crush a cow's skull. So Sarcosuchus? Yeah, it could probably bite through a car door if it wanted to. Here's another fun detail. That weird bulbous thing at the end of its snout? That's called a bulla, and it's actually unique to Sarcosuchus among crocodilians. Scientists still aren't 100% sure what it was for, but the leading theories are that it either helped with vocalization, basically making this croc even louder and more terrifying, or it was used for display, kind of like how some modern gharials have bulbous noses. Either way, it's a bizarre feature that makes Sarcosuchus even more alien compared to modern crocs. But honestly, the bulbous nose is just the tip of the weirdness iceberg. Alright, so we've established that Sarcosuchus was massive, never stopped growing, and ate dinosaurs. Cool. But here's where things get truly strange, because this croc didn't just exist in isolation, it lived in an ecosystem that was absolutely packed with other megapredators. And somehow, it still thrived. During the early Cretaceous, the area that is now the Sahara Desert was part of a vast river system that flowed through Gondwana, the southern supercontinent. And sharing this habitat with Sarcosuchus was a whole roster of nightmare creatures, including Suchomimus, a 36-foot-long spinosaurid theropod that also loved eating fish, and probably didn't appreciate the competition. You also had Rugops, a mid-sized abelosaurid, and various other carnivorous dinosaurs. So Sarcosuchus wasn't some unchallenged king. It was one apex predator among many, which makes its success even more impressive. But wait, it gets weirder. Remember how I said Sarcosuchus might have been too heavy for classic ambush tactics? Well, some researchers have proposed that this croc might have been semi-aquatic to fully terrestrial in behavior, spending more time on land than modern crocodiles do. Why? Because of its limb structure. While modern crocs have relatively short, sprawling legs that are great for quick water bursts, but terrible for sustained land movement, Sarcosuchus had slightly longer, more robust limbs that suggest it could have moved around on land more efficiently. Not gracefully, mind you. This thing still weighed 4 tons, but efficiently enough to potentially chase down prey on riverbanks, or even venture farther inland than we'd expect. Imagine being a small theropod, thinking you're safe because you're on dry land, and then this bus-sized crocodile just walks up to you. Like, not even quickly, just casually strolling over like, "Hey, I heard you thought you were fast." Terrifying. And then there's the whole growth rate thing. Modern crocodiles grow relatively slowly, taking years to reach even modest sizes. Sarcosuchus apparently decided that was for chumps. Based on growth ring analysis, it's estimated that Sarcosuchus grew incredibly fast during its early years, possibly adding several feet in length annually during its juvenile phase. This rapid growth would have been necessary to avoid becoming prey itself, because let's not forget, baby Sarcosuchus were not at the top of the food chain. In fact, they were probably on the menu for a variety of predators, including large fish, pterosaurs, and even other crocodilians. So the faster they grew, the faster they entered the untouchable size range. But here's the real kicker. Sarcosuchus wasn't even the only giant crocodilian during the Cretaceous. There was also Dinosuchus, which lived later in North America and was possibly even larger, and Purosaurus from South America, which came along much later, but still fits the theme of crocodiles that said no thanks to being normal-sized. So what we're looking at isn't an anomaly, it's a pattern. During certain periods of Earth's history when conditions were right, warm climates, abundant water, lots of prey, crocodilians just went absolutely ham on the size scale. And you know what the strangest part is? Despite being this massive dinosaur-eating, never-stops-growing monster, Sarcosuchus still had to deal with the same basic problems as any other croc. It still needed to thermoregulate, basking in the sun to warm up and retreating to water to cool down. It still had to avoid overheating in the African sun. It still had to find mates, lay eggs, and protect its young, though, given its size, I'm guessing not many things messed with a Sarcosuchus nest. But the point is, even at that scale, biology doesn't give you a free pass. You're still a crocodile with crocodile problems. Just bigger. So why does any of this matter beyond just, haha, big scary croc? Well, for one, Sarcosuchus completely changes our understanding of prehistoric food webs. For the longest time, the assumption was that during the Mesozoic, dinosaurs were the uncontested rulers of terrestrial ecosystems, and everything else was either prey or just kind of existing in the background. But Sarcosuchus proves that wasn't always the case. In certain environments, especially around rivers, lakes, and coastal areas, crocodilians could absolutely compete with and even dominate over dinosaurian predators. This is important because it tells us that ecosystem dynamics during the Mesozoic were way more complex than we often give them credit for. It wasn't just big dinosaur eats smaller dinosaur. There were multiple lineages of apex predators, each occupying slightly different niches, and they had to coexist and compete for resources. Sarcosuchus specialized in ambushing prey near water. Suchomimus likely focused on fish and smaller animals, and other theropods might have hunted in different areas or targeted different prey sizes. It's a reminder that nature doesn't really do simple hierarchies. Everything's messy and competitive and fascinating. There's also the evolutionary angle. Crocodilians as a group are incredibly ancient, with their lineage dating back over 200 million years. And throughout that time, they've experimented with all sorts of body plans and ecological roles. There were terrestrial crocodilians that gallop like dogs. There were herbivorous crocodilians that ate plants. There were marine crocodilians that competed with plesiosaurs and mosasaurs. And yes, there were giant crocodilians like Sarcosuchus that ate dinosaurs. The fact that modern crocodiles are relatively conservative in their body plan, semi-aquatic ambush predators, is actually the outlier, not the norm. Sarcosuchus is a reminder that crocodiles can be, and have been, so much weirder than what we see today. And here's the human connection. Sarcosuchus went extinct around 95 to 100 million years ago, likely due to climate changes and shifting ecosystems. The Sahara region began to dry out, rivers shrank, and the lush habitats that supported these giants started disappearing. Sound familiar? It's the same pattern we're seeing today with modern crocodilians, many of which are threatened by habitat loss, water pollution, and climate change. The difference is, we have the ability to do something about it this time. Sarcosuchus didn't get that option. It just slowly lost its world and faded out. But modern crocs? We can actually choose to protect them and the ecosystems they depend on, which seems like a pretty good deal considering they've been around since the Triassic and deserve a little respect. So let's bring it back to where we started. 100 million years ago, crocodiles ate dinosaurs for breakfast. And not in a metaphorical, they were successful kind of way. I mean, literally, there were crocodiles that woke up, looked at a multi-ton dinosaur, and decided that was going to be lunch. Sarcosuchus was a 31-foot, 4-ton, never-stops-growing apex predator that flipped the script on who was supposed to be in charge during the Mesozoic. It had a bite force that could crush bone, limbs that let it hunt on land, and a growth rate that ensured it spent as little time as possible being vulnerable. And the wildest fact? Despite being one of the most terrifying predators of its time, Sarcosuchus still had to deal with all the same basic biological needs as any other crocodilian. Thermoregulation, reproduction, finding food. It was just a crocodile trying to make it in a world full of dinosaurs. Except it was doing so while being the size of a school bus, and having a bite that could snap a theropod's leg like a toothpick. So the next time you see a modern crocodile lazily floating in a river, maybe show it a little respect. Because its ancestors, they didn't just coexist with dinosaurs, they ate them. And honestly, that's kind of metal. Thanks for watching, and until next time, remember, if you ever invent a time machine and decide to visit the early Cretaceous, maybe just stay away from the water and the land near the water. Actually, you know what? Just don't go.